My name is Christina. I'm the tutoring specialist here at Literacy Pittsburgh. If y'all want to put yourselves on mute for now, I'm going to kind of try to roll through this. And when we get to the end, I am happy to stay as late as people want and answer any and all questions. So definitely write your questions down. You can also put them in the chat if you don't want to forget them. That's what I do because I tend to forget things. I wanted to meet with everybody today to talk about determining reading level and kind of using what types of tools we have to find reading material. When I talk with tutors, I generally end up kind of talking about two areas. One of them is listening activities. That tends to be a huge thing that a lot of listening and pronunciation, but reading and how to find reading material and how to get the students to read seems to be something that I'm talking to a lot of tutors about. So that's one of the reasons I put this presentation together. Sorry guys, there we go. Well, I wanted to let you guys know a little bit about me. I've been teaching English language learners since, not English language learnings, there's my first mistake. Since 2006 in a really wide variety of different roles in adult ed, community education, community colleges, universities. I did migrant ed for a while. I've also done advising for both GED and also for university and community college programming. So I kind of have had my feet in education for all of my career at this point. We already did kind of the show of hands, so I'm going to skip this, but it's good to see that we kind of have, we have some folks who are working with English language learners and some folks who aren't working with English language learners. And really, this presentation's got a couple of different pieces to it. So one of them is figuring out what is your students' reading level? And then the other one is going to be really how to find resources for those students. Before we dive into some things, I wanted to give some kind of general information because I think these are pieces for me that are I always consider reading to be a little bit of a puzzle when I'm working with a student. So I like to kind of keep background information in front of me. And I'm sure that you guys have seen these numbers. 78% of adults in the United States are considered literate. When I first started in adult education, I was always focused on, we want to teach the 22% of students who aren't literate to read, to become to engage in society. The longer I'm in this field, the more I'm focusing on this second number, which is that 54% of the adults who are literate are reading at or below a 6th grade reading level. So they're not illiterate, they're reading at a 4th to 6th grade reading level. Which then begets the question of what does it mean to be literate? Who determines that, right? Does anybody have any ideas what literacy might mean? Because I tried to look for a concrete definition and I was struggling finding one answer to this. Does anyone want to shout an answer at me? Susan, you're not muted. Can I voluntold you? Yeah, what does it mean? If you think somebody's literate, what does that mean to you?
It's what can they accomplish? What can they absorb into their mind and then show evidence of having, by acting on it, I guess, just as an off-the-cuff guess.
All right. I mean, I don't have an answer for this. There is no answer. So anyone else have any feedback on this? Because this was something, the more I'm in this field, the more I'm looking at that second number and wondering, what does this mean?
I think, to me, it means someone who can make meaning from words, however it is they get those words. Hopefully, if it's literacy, they're using their eyes or fingers or whatever to get the words to make meaning out of them.
All right, I like that. Anyone else have anything?
In my past life, everything or a lot of things revolved around the word reasonable. So I would say they would be able to read enough to be able to reasonably function.
I think that might be what I'm finding, like the federal government,
Right,
maybe.
and then you define reasonable.
Yeah, like what does that mean? And that's kind of been when I meet with tutors who are kind of new to tutoring, when they talk about finding reading, frequently they'll be thinking of like, what did they read in high school or in middle school? Like which great books did we read? We read The Great Gatsby, we read The Catcher in the Rye. And I have to keep going back to this number that most of us, even just in our daily lives, it looks like, are not reading The Catcher in the Rye, and we're not reading The Great Gatsby. And that a lot of the things that we're encountering are kind of written at this 5th, 6th, 7th grade level. And as long as students can reasonably kind of traverse that world, they would be considered literate. So when we're working with them to do like high school equivalency, we may need to be working on stepping them up the ladder, right? To get to the 8th grade level, the 10th grade level of reading. And this is something I forgot too. When I first started teaching reading to intensive English students, I remember, I think I did actually show up with The Great Gatsby in one of my first classes, and that did not go well. So I had to learn how to kind of meet the students where they were. And again, like, why are we talking about the general kind of literacy of people in this country? One of them is it kind of helps. It kind of, for me, it feels like it, for some of the students, when I've talked to them, I have to remind them that they're on much more equal footing than they realize. Like if they're reading at a 4th grade level, most people are reading at a 5th or 6th grade level. And that's kind of, they're a lot closer than they think to kind of a lot of their peers. But that there is a little bit of, that there's, you know, definitely going to be room for them to keep moving up, but that there's a lot that they can access if they can hit kind of that 6th grade level. It definitely helps us find material. And I right now am blanking on why I write students history, but I'm sure I'll remember it at some point. I apologize for that. I have my notes on another sheet of paper, but I dumped coffee on them. So I'm using my notes from my PowerPoint. Okay, so I wanted to briefly talk about like some basics of understanding reading levels. How do we come up with the levels when we designate a student as being like low intermediate or, you know, beginning literacy or advanced? Like, where are we pulling that information from? And there's kind of 2 buckets of tests that we're pulling this information from. For ESL students, if they are still working on their listening and speaking skills, we have 2 tests that we have a test that we give them called the Best Plus, and that test exclusively focuses on listening and speaking skills. So the vast majority of ESL students that we have who are kind of not super advanced, but, and this gets a little bit complicated, but the vast majority of the ESL students are taking a listening and speaking test. We use something called the Best Lit sometimes, which is a reading and writing test, but that's for a much smaller population of students. We also are gathering writing samples from those students, and that's generally how we're determining what a student's literacy level is. It's a very tiny little kind of snapshot into their ability to read and write. Once a student tests out of, like, once they have eclipsed the Best Plus or the Best Lit, so their speaking is so advanced that they test out of that, or their reading and writing is beyond the kind of ESL basic level, they move over to taking what's called the TABE test. And for all of our students who were educated in the United States, they are starting on the TABE test. So anybody who's working on a high school equivalency or just has a goal of improving reading, they're taking what's called a TABE reading test. The reading test is a reading comprehension test, and it is much more like what you might have taken in grade school as far as like standardized testing. It's looking for like language arts things, but also main idea, supporting details, evidence, summarizing, and inference. So when you hear us talking about like the levels of your students, this is where we're getting this information. And these tests are, it's just a snapshot of your student's ability. So if your student had a bad day when they took the test, it's possible that, you know, they can read higher or do more. So just kind of keep that in mind. Sometimes when we meet with students, they'll kind of look at their test results, and we tend to, sometimes they can be kind of shocking because they're a little bit lower. Sometimes the student truly is lower, but sometimes it's just because it's the first time that they're taking the test and it's, you know, overwhelming. And so once they get back up on the horse of testing, many students do better as they're moving through. So where can you find this information? Because I'm sure some of you are like, I don't know where to even begin to look to find out, like, is my student low intermediate or high intermediate? And why is that going to matter, right? It's going to matter because as we're starting to look for reading material, or as we're starting to look for things for our students to interact with, we at least need some sort of starting place. So for ESL learners, this is always on your learning plans that you get, and you get the learning plans when you initially start tutoring with us, but also when a student makes progress on that test and they make what we call a gain, they kind of move up to the next level, we're going to run a new one to see, like, hey, it's time to update their material. It's time for them to get a new textbook. So you might get a new learning plan from your program coordinator after your student tests because they've made some progress and it's time to move on with the material. So this is where the student level is, up here in the corner. I will tell you that these learning plans are going to be changing in the next few months, and I'll show you kind of the direction that we're moving in. And again, ESL is kind of a little bit sticky because these students only, in most cases, are only taking a listening and speaking test. So their literacy, we're determining through writing samples. So we do lean heavily on you to kind of gauge whether or not a student has a lower literacy level than they're speaking or a much higher literacy level than they're speaking. For the ABE, for the adult basic ed students, this is what the learning plan is going to look like. And you're going to have two places where you're going to see a student level. At the top, you're going to see reading placement. And so it'll say something like high intermediate, low beginning, advanced. Over here as well, this is actually the number that we're going to start looking at. And this is the grade level equivalency. We're going to be using some of that today. We're moving in the next few months, all of the reading, all of the ESL and the ABE learning plans are going to be moving to this sort of format, where we tell you what the student placement is, and then we explain the placement to you. And we also explain their level. So we explain which tests they took, and then we're going to explain the things that students at that level tend to be able to do. And you can kind of use that when you're meeting with your student to see, one, understand a little bit more about what their abilities might be, but two, gauge it and see, like, are they above this? Are they kind of at this, or they're maybe at the very beginning of this? And one of the things that we're doing in this is putting, you guys can see that I've circled where it says 6th to 8th grade. We will be putting the grade level equivalencies in there. This is for your use only. We really, really do not, I kind of speak delicately about this. Most of your students have above a 6th grade education. So when we tell them that they tested at a 6th grade level, it can be like a kick in the gut. So this is really for us to use to help find material. It's okay to tell them that they're high intermediate or low beginning. But even those, if you have students kind of on the lower end, we really want to focus on what they can do instead of what they can't do, because the students tend to really, really focus on what's missing. And for me, it's more important to get everybody moving by focusing on what they can do and then building on those skills so that we can kind of pump them up instead of telling them that they're reading at a 4th grade level. And this can be really tricky for students who are high school equivalency students who maybe will tell you, I dropped out of school in the 11th grade. Maybe they've been out of school a while, their academic reading skills might be a little bit rusty, and when they took the test, they may be starting at like a 6th grade level. So it is kind of building back up the ladder. Okay, so finding appropriate reading material. I know that I have some folks here working with ESL students and also with ABE students. So we're going to get into a little bit about like what material I'm recommending kind of across the board when I'm working with tutors. If you have students who are on kind of the beginning end, this isn't really geared, ESL beginning students, that's like a separate conversation. This is kind of low intermediate ESL students, all the way through adult basic ed students. When you have students that we're calling kind of more beginning level, we definitely want them reading. We want them reading a lot, right? Because that's the only way that they're going to kind of improve. We definitely recommend that you use the textbooks for reading sources. If you don't have textbooks yet, please reach out to us and we can help you get them. We also have some supplemental reading books that we can give you. So in addition to the textbooks, we have one that I really like called City Stories. City Stories is a 4-level reader. So at the very basic levels at the beginning, it's very like subject, verb, object sentences, and they're clearly written out in pages. So it's not in a paragraph format, it's kind of stacked. It's written for adults, about adults. So it is a book that is not geared towards children, even though it's at a 3rd grade reading level. It goes to about 5th grade reading. By the time you get to the end, the pages, it's like 5 and 6 page stories and the storylines get more complicated. We also have 3 series that are a little bit more geared towards ESL learners. One's called That's Life, one's called Health Stories, and one's called Life Goes On. And these go up to about the intermediate level of reading. The students who use these, they all really like these. So if anybody is looking for kind of lower level supplemental reading material, you can reach out to me or your program coordinator for these. I wanted to show everybody ReadWorks. Has anybody here used ReadWorks? Show of hands. Anyone? No one. Okay. ReadWorks is a website that I love for finding reading material. And again, as we're moving forward in the next few months, you're going to be able to get more precise information about kind of like approximate grade levels that your students are reading at. And that's really going to help drive finding this material. So ReadWorks is a website. You create a free account, so anybody can create an account. You look for reading material in the grade range that'll be on your learning plan. I did this. I really like this website for looking for students who are kind of, I would call emerging readers. So they're kind of not quite to the point where they're going to be able to read like chapter books, but maybe you're looking for something that's more interesting than what's in the textbook, or just more pages. This website, you can go all the way up through 12th grade to find things. So when you log in, you just basically say which grade level you want. This is geared towards, K through 12. But what I like about this is that many of the articles on here they're not revolving around children. So you can use them with adults respectfully. When I went in and did 3rd grade, the first thing I picked up was this article called A Silent Language. I like it because it gives you the article, but then it also has audio of somebody reading it, so that the students can, like after they read it, they can listen and while somebody is reading, to read along, which can be really, really useful for students who are kind of emerging readers, who are kind of between learning to read and reading to learn. This can be really, really useful. This website, this particular article, when I copy and pasted it into a Word document, it was 2.5 pages. So that's pretty good. If you're at a 3rd grade reading level, that's a substantial document. As I was going through it, the words were really appropriate. The sentences were pretty simple, but it had really interesting content. So when we start moving to intermediate and advanced, obviously textbooks. News for You, has anybody used that one? Yes, no, thumbs up, thumbs down? No, okay. News for You is a really good website that has kind of daily publications of what's going on in the world. It's kind of at a high intermediate level. I am going to be emailing everybody with a code to access it. So everybody who's here, I'm going to go in and I'm going to email you all of the links that I'm talking about today, any usernames and passwords that we have, and any other links or anything that you might need to get into these. News for You, I really like. There's kind of daily changes and what's up there. There's questions, vocab, things like that. News ELA for anybody working with high school equivalency students. This is a really great website because you can find articles about social studies, science, and language arts. So these are 3 areas, and you can find them kind of starting at like a 4th or 5th grade level all the way up through 12th grade. So if you have somebody who's studying for the GED and they know, you know that they're like working on the social studies section, you might work out of your book. Maybe you're working out of the Kaplan book to get them some practice exams and questions from the GED, but then you can go to News ELA and download specific articles or like more science or social studies work. And Common Lit is another one. It's kind of like ReadWorks, only it's for like much more advanced. So I'd say that starts at about 6th grade. Common Lit is actually super, super popular with high school teachers. It's really great. They kind of have entire thematically organized units of just downloadable lesson plans with like all of the material attached, all of the vocab, all of the questions, the activities. So if you haven't accessed Common Lit, I strongly recommend that one too. All right, and then chapter books. That's another, this is probably the biggest question I get is how do I find chapter books when I am working with my students? And this is the part where I think all of us as tutors, as teachers, like we all kind of struggle with picking the right level for our students. So we're going to talk about that and talk about some tools for that. Okay, so this is the rough guide on how to pick a book. And again, I said at the beginning of this, I am not going to be able to solve everybody's problems on like finding reading material. I'm just trying to give people tools that they can use and start trying to navigate so that you can zero in a little bit more. All right, so when I showed you all the Reading Works website earlier, you may have seen like there's a lot of information that's underneath these articles. One of the things that you might see, obviously this is saying 3rd, which is telling us the grade level. And then it's got these numbers that say, this one says 450L, this one down here says 820L. Those are called Lexile levels. We're gonna get into Lexile in just a second. There are many different mediums, there's many different forms for kind of evaluating a reading level of a text. I went to school for applied linguistics, and I found out later that if I wanted to make money, I went into the wrong side of linguistics because there's a field called computational linguistics, that this is what they do. One of the things that they do is they take huge amounts of text and they're running it through these things called concordancers. And that's how they're coming up with these numbers and ratings. It's obviously more complicated than that, but that's kind of the basics of this is that there's a computer that these run through with an algorithm that then gives you a number and says, okay, this text is this level. Our job now is to figure out how to read these levels. And these levels, I talk about this a little bit later, but you might be on Amazon sometimes and see these. There are some local libraries that have these listed next to books. And there's other websites that use this Lexile level. And I use Lexile just because I think that they have the most number of books rated. And I'll show you in a minute what I mean by that. Okay, so where else you might see the Lexile numbers? Common Lit also uses Lexile. Yes, I just said that. All right, so let's take a look at the Lexile tool. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Can you guys see the Lexile website? Okay, perfect. It's just lexile.com. This is, there are tiered, this is a website that has kind of tiered access. So there's like what's free and then there's what's behind a paywall. We're gonna focus on what's free today. I will admit they just moved my favorite tool for evaluating like websites behind a paywall a couple weeks ago, and I was really upset because I was putting this together and I was like, oh my goodness, they just moved this behind the paywall. So when you're on here, you go up to Lexile Tools, and we're going to be looking at well, first we need to look at the grade level chart. So let's do that first. So when you go in here, there's a couple of different ways that you can navigate this. I personally like to look at the whole chart because it makes it's easier for me to look at. When you're in here setting this, you're going to see this curve here, this bell curve. And this is a lot of information on this website. And I'm trying to give you like as little as I can on this. I personally set this to 25 to 50% because what we're going to be looking at are what are 25 to 50% of kids who are at these grade levels. These are the grade levels, right? What level can they read at? And I like to set it to the middle of the year. This like really gets into the weeds. Kids in the middle of the year who are taking these assessments, 25 to 50% of them, these are their ranges. I set it to this because in my mind, the students coming to us, we're going to assume they're kind of in the middle of something. And I like to set it a little bit on the lower side. If you set this higher, their ranges start really, really spreading out and they get a little bit eye-popping. And my assumption is our students are at our doorstep because they need our help. They are likely going to be kind of on the lower side of these. So you can download this into a PDF so that you don't have to mess with the tool and then just save it onto your computer. And this is what the PDF looks like, right? And I can email this as well. Use this. This is your guide, right? So you see these numbers and you see that some of the numbers on the lower end of like 5th grade, 770L, if you look at the higher end, at the 50% of 4th grade, you see 790L. It is not like an exact one-to-one. These are spectrums, these are ranges. And if you remember being in school, you remember that there were some of your classmates who were really strong readers, right, would be on the upper end of this. And then some of your classmates were the weaker readers. I fully admit I was one of the weaker readers. I was in special ed for years when I was in grade school. So, I mean, these charts make sense to me because I was always kind of on the lower end, aiming for the upper end. So what you again are looking at is this is kind of like looking at a map, and we've taken the space between two exits on an interstate, and these numbers are kind of mile markers. There's no right place for our students to be, and there's no wrong place for those students to be. There is just where they kind of are. There's between these two exits. So we're looking at this. We have the chart now. Now we're going to start looking up some books. So when your students meet with you and they say, I want to read a book, and you're like, cool, what do you like to read? And maybe somebody says to you, you know, my favorite movie growing up was Jurassic Park. And I picked this only because my kid is becoming obsessed with dinosaurs. And so he really wants to watch this. It's giving you this rating here, right? And the rating on that is 710. All right, so I go back to my chart and see 710. What is 710? So it looks like 710 could fall at the 4th grade level, but more likely, it's probably also somewhere at like the 5th grade level. This is not the content of the book. This is not the subject matter. This is literally, are the sentences short? Are they relatively uncomplicated? Are they using relatively accessible vocabulary? So it has nothing to do with the plot. If the plot is complicated, that's not what this is assessing. This is just assessing the sentence complexity and the words that they're using. I was pretty, I won't say shocked, but I was looking at that and I was like, wow, okay, they think Jurassic Park is like somewhere in 5th grade. I looked up, I started thinking about some other books. When I worked at another ESL program, used to recommend John Grisham with no data to support it because they were always easy to read. When I would read them like chapters with my students, they could frequently do them. So I looked up A Time to Kill and found that one was rated 770. Again, shorter sentences, the words aren't going to be that complicated. Now, John Grisham's plots, a little bit convoluted, right? He's frequently got like 5 or 6 different things happening that kind of all converge at the same time. But again, we're talking about, can the students read the words on the page? So I go back to that 770. That's probably like 5th grade, maybe low 6th grade. So again, you're looking at these as a spectrum, and I tend to bump these up a little bit. So if it says that it's 5th grade, I might add a grade to it, just because in my mind, I don't want to give the students something like way too hard for them. So I might always err on the side of a little bit lower until I find the right level for them. I looked up a couple of other books. I looked up I was at my father's house the other day, and The Time Traveler's Wife was on some station. So I was like, oh, I remember reading that. So I Googled that. That showed up at a 720. Again, like you're looking at about a 5th grade reading level. I looked up The Secret Life of Bees because I love that book. That showed up at 840. So that's showing up at probably about like a 6th grade level. And then I looked up some of the classics that when I work with some of our AmeriCorps members, sometimes they come in and they're really excited to like teach literature. So I looked up Catch-22, which frequently comes up as a book that they want to teach. That one showed up as 1140. And you guys can see 1140 is starting to get into like 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade. So we're moving up. So if I'm working with somebody who I know has a 5th grade reading level, and I'm now handing them Catch-22, they're not going to be able to understand it. Like they might be able to like read the words on the pages maybe, but it's literally just going to be processing words, and they're not going to be getting any of the content happening. The Great Gatsby was another one that I sometimes have people come in and tell me they want to try. That also shows up somewhere between 8th and 10th grade. Charlotte's Web, which is also another frequent one. I have a lot of people who always like reading Charlotte's Web because they think that it is, it's a book for, lower middle schoolers. This will be accessible for my student. That book is rated at 680. So I have Charlotte's Web that's 680, and then I had Jurassic Park, which was 710. And I have to look at that as somebody and think, if I were a student, which one would I want to read more? Now I know my preference because I like action, I like mystery, so I'd be way more interested in reading something like Jurassic Park. And I guess I'm showing you all of this to show you that we may have a lot more options in what it is that we're offering our students than we might be realizing. So when you have a student who's kind of this like emerging intermediate level reading, a lot of the books that are written for adults, you go back to that first slide I was showing you, they're kind of written at like a 5th or 6th grade level. So there might be a lot more stuff that's accessible than we're realizing. I recently had another student, she really liked mysteries and wanted to read a mystery. And I think I talked the tutor into Girl on a Train, which is like another movie book from the past 5 years. And apparently the student like ate the book up because she was just so excited. It was so interesting. These like tools have a lot of limitations. So most of what's in Lexile is way geared towards like middle school and high school, which means that if the book is new, if you're looking up something that was published in like the last 5 years, it's probably not in here yet. These are really like the biggest, most popular books. So if you're looking up something that's not quite as popular, this may not be as useful. But this might give you at least some signposts inside your head to try to start seeing if you can use this information to gauge what you're reading on the page. There is here, if you feel like paying $18, you can do what's called a text analyzer, which means you could take the text from any book anywhere, type it in, and it's going to give you a Lexile score of it. This used to be, again, this was my favorite text analyzer that I would use for like websites, like the when people would send me websites and say, hey, is this appropriate for my students? I would dump it through this and say, well, this is about a 4th grade level, or no, this is like a 12th grade level. Don't let, this is way too hard. So I'm going to stop here because this tool is definitely going to take y'all, like, this is a play with this thing. This isn't like it works perfectly the first time you do it. And the search is also always not perfect. Like you'll look up a book and the book will be there, and then you'll look up the author and it'll tell you that nothing's there. So you kind of have to play with it to find the material. Does anyone have any questions at this moment? I'm going to take a minute because I know this is like a lot of information.
Yes, I have a question. Is there a guideline that does this for magazines?
No, and that's where the text analyzer was great because you could just
Okay.
dump scene content in. I'm gonna, right before this, I had the idea that I might try to sign us up for a like an account through here. If I am able to convince my people to do that, I can send everybody the username and password for that so that you guys can go in at as you want to and just kind of put content in to kind of gauge roughly what the levels are.
Yeah, I've been trying different online magazine articles for her interest and then trying to figure out the reading level. So I've tried like historical magazines, like history.com biographies, things like that. Nat Geo Kids is just too easy for her.
Yeah, it's right. It's a strange thing, right? There's like a weird, because it's either too easy or too hard. So it's
Right.
like, how
If
do you
you're a
find that
beginning
sweet
person, Nat Geo Kids is a great resource, I think.
Yes, I would actually recommend that you check out Common Lit. I would check out in there because there's a lot of short articles and they're much more, they are all like exactly, like it'll tell you exactly what the Lexile or the grade levels are.
Okay, yeah, I think that would help me the most. Thank you.
Perfect.
Can you do
Cheryl,
me
did you-
one favor?
Yes,
Can
ma'am.
you look up To Kill a Mockingbird? I'm just curious.
Oh, what do you think it is?
I think it's extremely high. I gave my student the book and I'm rereading it and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is very difficult.
I read that in 8th grade. So I
So
don't know.
1120. So this is one of the things when you see this, you have to pay attention to what you're looking at. This is To Kill a Mockingbird, a graphic novel, the 690. So they have turned it into a graphic novel. This one, when you see multiple numbers, it's likely the 1120 is what I'm gonna guess.
I would guess it's probably, yeah, much above what she should be. I would say it's probably a 10th or 11th grade level.
I would tend to agree with you on that, 10th grade.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And you will sometimes, man, you'll find sometimes they'll like give you ratings in here that you're like, what? That's not right. And it's okay to disagree with the experts on this. If your student can't do it, they can't do it. So move them down a level and that's fine. And we're gonna, Cheryl, we'll talk in a minute about another method for you, like looking at something to see if it's appropriate.
So if we ask you to feed the current teacher or the current testing level of the student, would you suggest books or do we need to go in and do this?
You can, I'm happy to suggest books, but I
Okay.
also have tons of people who like to go out and find stuff. And this just kind of gives you some tool to do it, right? Because otherwise you're just kind of looking at stuff. And all of us go back to, oh, I read Catcher in the Rye. Oh, I read like these books that are great books, but we were reading them for literature, not for literacy. And I think that's like to separate those two things.
Because I have never been given the reading level on either of my students.
This is something that's newer. We are working in the direction of everybody having it so that everybody can kind of have more information about what's going on with their students for the exact reason that you're saying, that it's to give everybody the same information that we have and make it usable, accessible, right? Does anyone else have any questions before I move on?
I just had a suggestion. I meet at a library with my student
Mhm.
and I ask the librarians, I say, I have an adult here and I think she's about at the 6th
Yep.
grade level. Do you have any books around here that wouldn't insult her? And usually they're pretty good with coming up with some things. They're a great
Librarians
resource as
are-
well.
Librarians are amazing resources.
Yeah.
I undervalued as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So yes, I would definitely ask librarians if you can, because they know. And again, they understand like the, you know, popular fiction is popular for a reason. It's popular because it's accessible to most people. So they're going to know which books are like a little bit less heady, a little bit less, not Umberto Eco, right? Like we're not picking up to read a college lecture. We're reading for fun, for pleasure.
I was shocked. They gave me some math books that were for first, second, and third graders, and my student reads at a 5th or 6th grade level, and she loved those books.
Right?
I was shocked by it, but it was nice, you know, a good kind of shock. So,
It's always good to have the good shock,
yeah. So,
positive instead of the negative.
Yeah.
Well, I just have a couple more slides and then I can definitely open this up. Yeah, like I said, this is an imperfect system. You're gonna really, when you're looking at the chart, this is basically like a rough guide of where the entrance is and a rough guide of where the exit is. So if you find something that's a little bit lower, it's probably okay. If you find something a little bit higher, that's why we're going to talk about the next thing, which I call the hand method. So now I did that. Okay. I taught ESL to college-bound students for years, and they would come in with English reading levels of like 3rd and 4th grade, and we had to get them up to like 10th or 11th grade so that they could succeed in university settings. I had a coworker who had taught 3rd and 4th grade before deciding he wanted to do ESL, and he was the one that taught me this. And this has been my like easiest trick for figuring out if a book is too easy, too hard, or just right for a student. Okay. He called it the hand method. Apparently there's like a grammar thing called the hand method too. So, you know, obviously this naming is not great, but so what he did, Cheryl was just asking about To Kill a Mockingbird. So you look up To Kill a Mockingbird. It looks like it's the right level for your student. You sit down to read it. You get moving with your student and you're like, something's off. Like they're either not understanding it or like they're really struggling. So what you can do if you and your student have the book is you can tell your student to take their hand and cover a portion of the page, right? I like to do it at the beginning of a paragraph because that just makes it easier for them to see. They are going to focus on reading the amount of space, like the amount of text that's covered with their hand, right? That's basically what the hand is. And you tell them to put their hand down on the ground and read through that hand-sized chunk of text. And they're going to put down a finger every time they come to a word that they absolutely cannot understand. Not a word that they don't understand or like that they kind of know, not a word that they can guess the meaning of through context, but a word that they are like, I have no clue what this is. So they put down one finger for every word. If they get to the end of that chunk and they've got 5 fingers down, it's probably an okay level book. That means that they came on 5 words that they didn't know in that chunk, and that they were able to read around it and they could keep going. It didn't like totally stop them. That's probably an appropriate level book. If they get to the second line and they have put down all 5 fingers, it's too hard. Like this book is something that we need to move down a level. If they get all the way to the end and they've put down 1 finger or no fingers, you know at that point that it might actually be too easy. And we do have students who are reading stuff that's too easy right now. It is a cheap and easy, very imperfect, very informal way of assessing, but it can be a really useful tool if you're sitting in front of your student and you can't figure out, you're like, well, this is supposed to be the right level. Have them do that and just see how far down the page they get with that. You can do that if you want to pick a chapter book with them. One of the things that you can do is just pull a paragraph out, like, or you take your hand, take a picture of it, send it to them, and then do it with them online before you get the books, so that you can see, is this a book that we should pursue? No, this isn't a good level. Let's try something a little bit lower. Or wow, this is too easy for you. Let's kick it up a notch. And this again, like when you're using the Lexile, it's imperfect, but that's kind of like the second way that you can kind of double check that, is this the right level? And Keith, that might be something that you can use with the magazines. Have them cover a chunk and just, you know, have them put their fingers down every time they hit a new word.
I've done
I
this
was
with
shocked
pronunciation of
watching this
words.
while I taught that. Okay.
I've done this with pronunciation of words, and she caught on to that like immediately. that's a big hit. And we're to the point now where she just does it on her own when she gets to a word that she can figure out right away.
That's great. So that's my like cheap and easy kind of when you're working with your student and you want to quickly evaluate whether or not this may or may not be a good fit. That's I should change it to the Goldilocks method. It's not too hard, it's not too easy, it's just right. Oh, I missed a slide. Okay. I did want to quickly mention that when you sorry guys. Okay, I'm missing a slide. I did want to quickly mention that there are a couple of other, so Lexile is only one of the kind of like concordancers for figuring out like the reading level of a book, the rating of a book. You might hear Flesch-Kincaid level, that's one. You might hear ATOS, ATOS, that's another one. Those can show up on websites, Amazon. Flesch-Kincaid is always going to be just a reading level. So it'll say like 8th grade, 6th grade, 5th grade. ATOS is going to be like 5.3, meaning the first third of 5th grade. So this is like what you would read through the first third of 5th grade, or 9.4. So about halfway through 9th grade. You may, if you, I was in a training and I made the mistake of doing this, and Lisa and I were recently working on something and we ran some text through multiple of these and we came up with like 3 different levels, right? Like 3 different reading levels. And she said, well, what do you do? And I said, you pick the one in the middle, right? That's the honest answer is, I find it easy just to use one, get comfortable with it. And then that's kind of my baseline. Like I said, with Lexile, I always kind of err on the side of, if they say it's like the high end of 6th grade, I'm going to say it's like the low end of 6th grade. If they say it's the low end of 7th grade, I'm going to maybe look at it as like, this is probably like more like our 6th grade. Because not because our students are lower, but because they are testing everyone when they do this. And this includes like 6th graders with a lot more resources than our students have. So, and a lot of our students are kind of at the beginning of these ranges as well. And it just gives you more room to work with. Like I said, I dumped coffee earlier on my notes, so I believe that's it. I did want to put up my contact information because you guys are always welcome to contact me. Cheryl asked about contacting about to ask for reading lists. I'm happy to kind of direct you in some directions. When I'm talking to my student about finding reading material, I frequently find that students don't have the background like pleasure reading. So they may not, when you're like, oh, what do you like to read? They may not have a clue about how to even gauge that. So a couple of different questions that I used to ask were, what do you like to watch on TV? Right? Like, do you like to watch crime dramas? Do you like to watch sports? Do you like what do you like to watch? That can frequently kind of give you an arena to work in as far as book genres go. And then if there are any books that they want to read, we can work, there is something called the Oxford Bookworm series. If they show up and they say, I really want to read Sherlock Holmes is going to be like off the charts on these. We may have read him in 9th grade, but if you try to go back and read, you know, those books, they're written in such a proper English format, British English format. It's very, very advanced. There's a lot of archaic vocabulary in it. So we have these things called Oxford Bookworms that are like adapted readers. And we have an actual placement test that we can send students to give them ranges that they can kind of pick books from. And once we have their levels, we can send you like, hey, great, meet with your student. Here's like the 20 books that fall in that range and see if any of these look interesting. And I feel like other program coordinators have talked about these series before. So most of the coordinators are familiar with them. And with that, I am done talking. Does anyone have any questions or any comments or anything else that they want to ask or talk about?
I hate to be stupid, but this does not look like an email address to me.
That's because it's bunched up. It's specialist@literacypittsburgh.org.
And not your name. You don't have to put your name in there.
Nope, it's just specialist. It's like the general email account for me, the specialist. It's easier than my, I thought it was easier to remember than my name. My name's
Okay, that's fine.
not hard, but
That's fine. Thank you.
no problem.
Christina,
Yes, Joyce.
are there chapter books that are appropriate for adults?
Yeah, I mean, tons and tons of them. What do you mean by that? Can you give me a little bit more information about what you're
Oh,
asking?
I'm not sure that I can, but most of the chapter books that I've been familiar with in volunteering at the library are more for 6, 7, 8 grades, children in that age range. But the content is, related to what teenagers would be interested in. And so I haven't seen any chapter books that would relate to adult interests.
So Joyce, I think partly that's because as adults, we don't call them chapter books. We just call them books,
Okay.
That's what I was about to say. What is a chapter book?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
that's definitely a school terminology.
Okay.
So I wouldn't search for chapter books. I would search for something that your student is interested in. Like
Okay.
Christina was saying, a mystery,
Right.
if your student likes mysteries, go ask for an easy to read mystery. Some of the writers actually write these 1 hour, I think 1 hour books. And they are quick reads, so they might take me an hour. They're not going to take a student an hour, but the sentences are shorter and the vocabulary is easy. So
Yeah.
again, talk to the librarians, tell them what you're looking for. They are just so helpful.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Sorry, Christina, I barged
No, it's
in.
okay. No, I want to put a barge in. I mean, that was part of what I was kind of showing you, Joyce. If you look up, like, John Grisham books are like 6th, 7th grade reading level. So if that's where your student's at, you could read those.
Okay.
Are they going to get everything? Not necessarily, but and it may take them longer to read them. But that's part of what you're doing, is building reading fluency when you do this. I want to emphasize that reading is a muscle. If your student sits down and tries to read, if they have never read it's been 20 years since they've read a book, and they sit down and they try to read a 300-page book in 2 nights, they might be able to do it, but they may be more successful if they approach it as like working out. Like, you're not going to go try to run a marathon, not training. So they're going to train, and really just getting them like, okay, 4 nights this week, read for 10 minutes. Okay, 3 weeks later, we're moving up to 5 nights. Increasing that muscle time that they're using it is going to increase their ability to kind of get up on the treadmill and start moving. And Joyce, I might, there's some really good books that are like episodic that might be good. When you teach a group of students, that can be really hard, right? They show up sometimes, but not other times. So if they miss the class where they talked about the chapter where all the important things happen, what do we do? There are a number of books out there that are like the same character doing different things, solving different mysteries. And one of the most popular ones for ESL is the Ladies #1 Detective Agency.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody loves that series when they teach because it's episodic. Each chapter is kind of standalone. And that works really well. Short stories also work really well if you can find them at the right level.
Great.
Anyone
Thank
else?
you.
No problem. All right, if nobody else has any questions, I'm happy to jump off, but I'm also happy to stay on because I want to be cognizant of time. It's almost 3 o'clock. Thank you all so much. You guys all know where to find me. Again, as Cheryl pointed out, my email doesn't look like an email, but I promise it is, and I will respond. And yeah, I'm always happy to talk reading. This was one of my favorite things to teach when I used to teach ESL. And we have material. It's here and it's not hard to find. So reach out if you're interested in finding some titles for your student. And just also what other, honestly, if you're teaching ESL and you're wondering what to work with on your student, the honest answer is that ESL teachers are all over the internet with books that they have successfully taught. So if you look up intermediate ESL books, there are like lists upon lists upon lists that are out there, and you're welcome to run them by me to be like, hey, does this look appropriate? Run it through the Lexile tool and see if it looks like it's going to show up as being something that's more intermediate and not super advanced. But yeah, I use the internet even when y'all contact me. If I'm having a brain block, I use the internet. Yeah, Susan, did you have a?
Yeah, I just a couple things. I just wanted to see if it was a good idea, but I didn't feel like I had to put it on the recording or whatever. If you want to take the time, I can wait or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to. We can stop. If nobody else has any questions, y'all are free.
I
to
have
leave.
one question.
Yeah.
So would my thing be to go and find out what the student's level is, since I don't know it, and then come back to you?
It could be, we can do the level, but I would find out from your student, ask them what they like to watch or read or listen to. And then that gives me an idea too, before you and I talked about kind of like, what do they want to read? What do they want to learn? Do they want a whole book, or do they just want like, Common Lit is filled with great 2, 3, 4, 5 page, super interesting articles about any topic under the sun.
And that was something you gave us?
I'm going to email that today. I'll email a listing of all of the links that I shared,
Okay.
along with any access codes that might be necessary. Like News for You, we have an account with them and you have to input a code to use it. And Common Lit, you have to be an educator to have access. So I signed up through an email address that we keep for tutor resources.
Okay.
Yeah. Lisa, I have to ask, did you download all the participants? Do you know who all I'm emailing?
I have not done it yet, but I can.
Okay, perfect. That way I'll know who to email. All right.
Yep.
Well, I'm done, y'all. It was really good seeing faces. I always enjoy talking to y'all. We love having you. So I'm going to stop the recording.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I
Thank
appreciate
you
it.
very much.
Thanks.
This was great.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
So what's going on, Susan?
Oh, it was, I had several comments actually, but I kind of like taught to a text, like